Hey everybody, welcome to the real United States, and we are in downtown Washington, D.C. once again on this gray January morning, and we are here in front of what is, well, the ugliest monument in Washington, D.C. And that's not my opinion. It was dubbed that by a survey, I believe, but it certainly was dubbed that by the local newspaper in 2013. A publication which likes to, about every 10 years, explain to the community just how dreadful this monument is. And they did so in 1994 and in 2003 and again in 2013. And I suspect in 2023 they will come out again and tell us how dreadful the Temperance Fountain is. Now, I do not find this particularly ugly, but you know, I'm not an artist or an art critic. It is a largely granite piece with a bronze pair of dolphins in the middle that are intertwined, and they're scaly dolphins, which is weird because real dolphins don't have scales, but I'm sure it was some sort of artistic metaphor at the time. And in its tops, we'll show you in a moment, with a solid bronze, full-scale blue heron. And the fountain was in fact a drinking fountain. It was donated to the city of Washington in 1882 by a San Francisco dentist named Henry Cogswell. Now, this is going to be kind of a long and rambling story, so, you know, because I got a lot to tell you, but it all kind of ties together. Cogswell was a teetotaler, an anti-alcohol individual, part of the early temperance movement here in the United States. Now, the temperance movement, which lasted through, well, much of the 19th and the first half of the 20th century, was a movement to decrease or hopefully abolish the consumption of alcoholic beverages. So this is the Temperance Fountain that Cogswell donated in the hopes that people would drink water rather than alcohol. And when it was first donated, it had running water from the Washington Aqueduct, and it has a chamber underneath here somewhere for putting ice to cool the water. Now, the water would come through that ice and would come out of the fountain, and there was, in the day, a bronze cup that you would take, and you could take a drink of cold water. Well, and then the runoff was captured in a trough for the horses, because, of course, in the 1880s, that's what there were. There were no automobiles, there was horses. So the cold water was not wasted, it was saved, and the horses could drink as well as the people. And Cogswell believed, hey, if you can get a drink of cold water when there was no refrigeration at that time, well, why would you go ahead and pay for alcohol? Well, the fact of the matter is that in the 1880s, not only was alcohol kind of a necessity, because a lot of the water wasn't all that clean, but it was a social sort of a thing where it was considered impolite for people, especially men, to refuse alcohol. It was a social norm. Now, not in excess. Drunkenness was not an accepted practice. But alcohol consumption, even by the young, was considered everyday life. And it had been since the inception of the country. So the consumption or the non-consumption of alcohol has been a touchy subject for much of our nation's history. Now, this is where the story kind of comes off the rails, because I want to go back to talk about the touchiness of alcohol here in the United States. After the Revolutionary War, we had this huge debt. We had to pay for it. And we had to tax in order to do that. And the very first thing that our government decided to tax was distilled spirits. Okay, but the most popular distilled spirit in America in the time, in the late 18th century, was whiskey. And people were not happy about having to pay a tax on whiskey, to the point they refused to do it, and many of them gathered together in western Pennsylvania and attacked the local tax assessor and collector. This led to an outright rebellion, which became known as the Whiskey Rebellion. Okay, you may have heard of that. Well, it became so bad that the federal militia was brought together. We didn't really have a standing army at the time. Again, this is the very inception of the, this is Washington's first presidency. So the militia's called together. They get together roughly 13,000 troops. And President Washington, formerly General Washington himself, rides with the troops. The first and only time a sitting president has ever led troops in battle was the Whiskey Rebellion. And he showed up in western Pennsylvania. By that time, the 500 rebels said, hey, there's 13,000 guys with guns coming, and the president, I think we'll get out of Dodge, and they dissipated. About 20 people were arrested, all of whom were either released or acquitted. But that was the end of the Whiskey Rebellion. Anyway, so this has been a sore spot. The consumption of alcohol has been a sore spot in the United States since that time. This is when many people started, we'll preach temperance from the religious pulpit or from organizations. Cogswell, who was actually born in 1820, grew up in that time when temperance was, alcohol is bad for society, it's bad for your health, yada, yada. All right. And folks, I will admit, in excess, it is. In excess, most anything is bad for you. So, anyway, Cogswell donated this thing. They built it here real quick. The city of Washington, D.C. decided we don't really want to pay for the ice and the maintenance of putting the ice in here and everything. That's a big, ice was expensive in the 1880s. And within a few years, they just stopped maintaining it, shut the water off, and it's sat here now for 137 years and basically as an eyesore. Okay, we're going to swing around now. Bev, if you'll pan around here to the other side, because there's some other features I want to show you. I told you I wanted to show you the heron on top. Say, I don't know that there are herons in this part of the country, but that's okay, because Cogswell was not from this part of the country. But maybe there are. I've seen them in the south, in Florida. But there's full-size great blue heron on the top of this statue. Sorry about the background noises. The bus just stopped here. And you see that on the four sides, this side of this, it says temperance. And on the other sides, it says faith, hope, and charity. Okay? All good things. All good things. But if you continue to pan around, you're going to see the National Bank of Washington right here. Well, in the beginning years of the 20th century, and I'm going to put this picture up on screen right now, taken from back in the day. I think this was taken around the 1930s. And that building right there was ironically housed the Apex liquor store. So you've got this monument to temperance in front of what was for many, many years an acting liquor store in that first floor of the bank building. People hated these, and when I say these, Cogswell didn't just donate one to Washington, he donated 10 of them to cities across what was largely the eastern United States. Some of them got torn down by vandals, one of them got thrown into a lake. People were not happy about Cogswell's monuments to temperance. Not at all. This is one of the few that has survived without being vandalized or destroyed. The temperance movement he did gain strength during his era. Now, let me tell you about, let me diverge again. I'm going to come off the rails yet again. Cogswell, like I said, was a dentist from San Francisco, okay? Born in 1820, he moved out there with his wife and children, young children, in the middle of the 19th century, and was one of the only dentists in San Francisco. So he made a lot of money, but that wasn't how he made so much money. He took all the extra money he could and he invested it in real estate. And he made a fortune. It was, in fact, one of the first millionaires in San Francisco. So he had a lot of disposable income when he got to his early 60s, which is how old he was when he donated these statues to the various cities in the eastern United States in the hopes of impressing his ideals of what should and shouldn't be on the rest of the world, in my opinion. Okay, so during this time, one of his contemporaries, because they weren't exactly the same age, she was somewhat younger than him, was a woman from Oklahoma named Carrie Nation. Now, Carrie's way of dealing with temperance was a little more active, shall we say, a little more aggressive. Basically, she took a hatchet and went into saloons and broke everything up and threatened the barkeepers and whatnot, and was ultimately arrested, I think, 30 times in the course of her temperance campaign. And we apparently have a siren coming down Pennsylvania Avenue. Yes, we do. So, large fire truck. Oh well, that's part of real life, folks. Speaking of which, we are literally right on the edge of Pennsylvania Avenue, I didn't tell you, on 7th Street, where Indiana Avenue and Pennsylvania kind of come together because they're at different angles. So in this little semi-triangle at 7th Pennsylvania and Indiana is where this is located in central Washington, D.C. And we've been here before, so you may recognize the area. The Grand Army of the Republic statue is here, and General Winfield Scott is right over here. We're down by the Navy Memorial and right kitty corner from the National Archives. So anyway, that's how Cogswell bothers me, folks, is why I keep going off the rails on this, all right? He had a real problem with drinking, but he didn't have any problem with greed, all right? He could make a ton of money as a dentist. He could then turn around and invest that and make a ton of money as an investor. And he didn't give it to charity, no. He made monuments to his ideals about what society should be. So the man bugs me a little bit, personally. So if any of his descendants are alive and seeing this, I'm sorry, but it bothers me. So, anyway, it stands here today as the ugliest monument in Washington, D.C. And a monument, I suppose, to a certain element of free speech. It did have one significant impact on society, although not its intended one. It really didn't stop people from drinking. But what it did do, it and its kindred ones, is it created a bunch of councils or fine arts commissions, that's what they're called, across the country. Cities had a fine arts council to screen these sort of gifts before they were accepted, so that they could say, no thanks, but no thanks, we really don't want that gift. And that is how many of the fine arts councils in larger metropolitan areas across the United States was born, was out of this. So anyway, folks, that is the Temperance Fountain in downtown Washington, D.C., across from the National Archives. I hope you've enjoyed this rather meandering trip through history. And if you got questions or comments, make it a conversation. Leave it in the comment section down below. I love hearing from all of you. I try to get back to everybody I can. If you're new here, hey, thanks for joining us. I hope you'll consider picking subscribe and come along for the adventure, because we got lots more to show you. And as always, folks, well, thank you for watching.